Hello, everyone, and thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. Each week, we meet here in the Upload VR studios to discuss the next generation of personal computing. My name is Ian Hamilton. I'm in the United States, joined by David Heaney in Northern Ireland. VR brings us together into this broadcast studio where we've got cameras, a TV, and tablets for notes and comments. We syndicate VR Download out to all podcast platforms and encourage our audience to become Upload VR members. This week, we're sponsored by Veil VR, which released recently in early access on Steam. That's a first person shooter with immersive physics, full body animations, and skins. You can climb, vault, ride zip lines, and defy gravity on jump pads to achieve victory in this 5v5 competitive shooter. I also want to say thank you to our Upload VR members, YouTube. We've got John Westra, Dunadim, Smashed Reality, Robert Quinones, 360 Pickleball, Rick, Sexy Bicycle, Skiva, Andrew, Handy, Clay, ACP, Marcellus, Ryan, Mark, Joseph, Gravity, Joe, Quentin, Andrew, King Jello, Honglen, The Lucky Dogs Band, Aaron, Captain Clutch, Lazarus, James, Anthony, Mark, and Anthony as well. We've got a couple people coming up multiple times, a couple first names coming multiple times. Shola just became a new member while I was reading off that. Hello, Skiva and Guy Godin, the creator of Virtual Desktop, in our comments today for our live show. David, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so again, we really have a lot to talk about because obviously we did miss an episode just before the change of year, and then this Consumer Electronics Show had a lot of VR showings, and Ian and Kyle were there to get a lot of those products hands on. So we're going to first talk about the HP Reverb G2 discounts seemingly showing up in the Steam hardware survey. Bigscreen adding support for Disney Plus and Amazon Prime co-watching. Meta cutting Quest 1's social features and ending updates this year. Roblox reportedly coming to Quest later this year, potentially. Intel's flagship laptop Wi-Fi chip being able to directly connect to Quest headsets. Meta increasing Quest 2's GPU performance via a software update. Yes, really. The report detailing the apparent specs and features of Apple's upcoming headset. Lynx R1 ramping up production as the first headsets finally ship. The ultra high-end XTAL 3, which I really liked at last year's CES, getting a wireless option later this year. Shiftal's announcement that the ultra-compact MeganeX PC headset should ship this year for $1,700. Shiftal's FlipVR controller, which frees up your hands when you need them by flipping it around 180 degrees. Ian's hands-on experiences with Pimax Portal, and finally, Vive XR Elite, which if you've been living under a virtual rock for a week, is HTC's Quest Pro competitor, shipping next month for $1,100.
Our commenters are saying that this episode will be 4 days long. Ben, yes, I am very concerned about that. I was just joking with Heaney that we can't go too much more over 2 hours, and we think it's unlikely that the batteries will last that long on our headsets. So maybe we just don't plug them in this week and let them die at the 2 hour mark if we even get there. Yeah, CES was just last week. I did some crazy travel to get out there and back to Vegas. Saw a lot of things. I missed a couple of the big ones, but I've already got my sort of Pimax impressions up on the site and cannot wait to talk about that near the end of our show. I'm also working on my HTC Vive impressions, and just it was a big deal to kind of go back to CES after all this time, but we'll work up to that. And it was great meeting all of the people that I saw in Las Vegas. Windows MR was the fastest growing headset on Steam in December. That was boosted by holiday discounts on the Reverb G2. And yeah, do we want to talk about that real quick, Heaney? Go through these as fast as we can as we build towards the bigger ones.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say about this is that it does show that if the price is right, if the price is affordable, there is still an appetite for a tethered native PC headset that doesn't have standalone capability. Obviously, what we've been talking about on this show for years now, as we've been noticing in these Steam hardware survey trends, is that standalone headsets are what people want. People want to be able to pay a couple of $100s to have a headset that they can use completely independently on its own wirelessly or connected to their PC either via cable. But If you do have a native headset like Reverb G2, you have the opportunity for better comfort. You get those Valve Index like speakers that give you much higher end audio, and you have native DisplayPort, which people appreciate due to the lack of compression. The issue, of course, is that that headset is normally sold at $600, and other PC native headsets like the Index are all the way up at $1,000. But what we saw in December was Reverb G2 sold for $350 and then $300. And what you see finally for the first time in years in the hardware survey is Windows MR being the top grower. And that's obviously just a result of that pricing.
Yeah, we will keep an eye on the comments as always as the show goes on. So if we don't discuss certain things near the top of the show, we might get to it later in the show if we don't address it immediately. I don't know if there's a lot more to talk about here. It was just interesting to see Pico 4 make it to its mark on this chart, and we're going to see that move up, aren't we?
Well, I guess the one thing I would say about Pico 4 is that this growth is actually a lot less than I expected. It's not even second place. It's not even third place. It's not even, if you include the other category, fourth place. So what it looks like is that Pico 4 had a very strong launch, but actually hasn't managed to keep that momentum going. Obviously, we have to note that it's not sold in North America, so it doesn't have access to that US and Canada market. But still, I really would have expected Pico 4 to keep a bit more momentum than this. And that is the one I'm going to be keeping my closest eye on in the coming months in this hardware survey data is what happens to Pico 4? Was this December just a blip and it's going to come back and gain its momentum again? Or is it really just another one of those headsets that has a great launch and then fades away?
Yeah, and Guy is piping up in our comments to remind us that Virtual Desktop reports the headset as Quest 2 to Steam VR. So all of his users might be reporting wrong. So I would be interested to see if Valve shifts the way they record their data very soon, or somehow starts accounting for more of those Pico 4 users if they are getting recorded wrong. So that's a possibility as well. Let's move on to talking about Bigscreen launching co-watching support for Disney Plus and Amazon Prime. So, Bigscreen has been on an update tear recently with a couple major updates and trying to get there with co-watching before the competitors can really match it. Now, this is done, as I understand it, with their browser interface. So they're doing some work with the browser to evolve kind of the way it handles things. I tried to get in there and try it out, and it's still hard to sort of find people who are using like friends who are using Big Screen. I could find strangers' rooms, but that's a little alarming. Like I said, I think I went into a Big Screen room over the holiday and saw Santa murdering a special ops team, which yeah, that was the Big Screen experience for my Christmas right before this launch.
Yeah, it still is one of those apps that uses that room code system where it just isn't practical for VR, in my opinion, to have to somehow communicate a room code that someone then has to transfer from one device and type in their headset. I know a lot of devs like it. I know some players even like it. But I personally think it's an awful approach to VR that just doesn't work with the current inability to see your phone or PC in the headset.
Well, all right. So I get you there, but when we get to our later news with Quest 1, those room codes become the only way some people can get into an experience really easily, right?
Well, no, not really, because well, we'll talk about it at the time, but they're deprecating the party system for Quest. That doesn't deprecate the friends and invite system. It's just the persistent background voice call. If anything, it even makes it harder to use room codes because beforehand you could join a party on Quest and then speak out the room code to your friend who can type it in, and that's how a huge percentage of Quest gamers actually enter room codes when they're playing with each other. But now you can't even do that. So you have to text it to each other or use the laggy messenger interface. So obviously what Big Screen is doing here is they're optimizing for cross-platform usage where you can join someone on Steam VR even if you're on Quest. But I think a lot of devs need to acknowledge that if a huge percentage of your users are using Quest and they're playing with other Quest users, it's going to be a significantly better experience for them if you can just integrate the Quest friends list. When I open Population 1 and I want to play with my friend, I see a list of my friends, I click invite, they see the invite and they join instantaneously. I'm not saying they should get rid of room codes, but if they want to streamline that experience, you do need to have some sort of friend invite system.
Hmm. Yeah, well, the co-watching experience is a very, very big deal. I do expect a lot to change between now and this time next year with the way co-watching is supported across a variety of platforms. When I've even had co-watching experiences work sort of outside VR using the Disney Watch Together feature and Apple AirPods Pro, it was a really, really nice experience, even with head tracking to sort of track the audio to wherever the phone is located. Very, very interesting experience that's all laid out there for Apple to take advantage of. And really, really interesting to see Bigscreen sort of at the forefront here, trying to push forward. And I will just note, while we're at the beginning of the show, or while before we move on to the next subject, that Bigscreen is teasing some kind of a secret project. So we hope to get more info about Bigscreen's secret project very soon. Um, we ready to move on there? Any comments you want to respond to right now, Heaney? David Heaney.
Shola pointing out that most of their big screen co-watching is with non-Quest users, and that is a great point. We really do need some sort of better solution in the long term for how do you play between different VR platforms without this awful system of having to somehow communicate a room code to each other.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm fine with the way Walkabout Mini Golf does its room code. So I don't want to like rely on a platform specific party system uh
Well, it's
too much because like I mean I wouldn't want the platform party system without the room codes. Is I guess the way I would put it.
sure, but the party system is separate to the friend system. You can completely ignore the party system, even if it didn't exist. You still have a list of friends that you can invite. I'm sure you played plenty of VR games where you just see a list of your friends, you click invite, and that's it. You're in
Yeah.
the game with them.
Yep. That needs to get and it obviously does need to get easier. Shola saying, "I wish a cross-platform friends list existed." Yeah. We ready to move on to the next subject, Teeny?
Yeah, let's talk about exactly what we were just hinting about.
Yeah.
Quest One losing those features.
Yeah. So Meta is ending updates for Quest One this year, and they're cutting the headset off from some of the built-in social features. Quest One was announced personally by Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook CEO, near the end of 2018. It started shipping early, well, more toward the middle of 2019. I think it was in May. And then it was on sale until 2020 when it was replaced by the Quest 2. Now, of course, Quest 2 debuted at $300, and then it is now returned to the original Quest 1 price of $400. Kind of a big deal to see this device reach its end of life, at least officially. I expect it to be in a lot of collectors' cabinets, Heaney, don't you?
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it quite end of life yet. It's certainly approaching end of life. So to be clear, what is happening here is that from now on, there will be no new feature updates. So it will continue to function as normal. From March 5th, it will lose the Horizon Home invite system. So you'll no longer have that Horizon Home social experience. It's also losing already the ability to use the party system that we were just referring to, which is just like an Xbox Live style background audio call. And at the end of this year, it will lose security updates. And I think that's when you can kind of call it end of life. Though Meta is still noting that you can still, purchase and download and install apps from the store onto Quest One. So I think what eventually happened with Go was that developers weren't even allowed to release updates to it anymore. Though, given that Quest does use the same store system, it seems like it'll be quite a long time until Quest is completely unable to, for example, download games and use them. So it's certainly in its final phase, but it's not a paperweight just yet.
Yeah, I know that there is like a significant percentage that are still using it for certain apps. Like I was checking to make sure it still was compatible with Supernatural pretty recently, because that's like a really obvious app to hand down to an older like a new VR user if you go out and get a new headset. You could obviously hand off this experience and have it run. I do wonder if this kind of puts the green light to devs on ripping out support over time.
Yeah, so right now, developers are only able to target Quest 2 only I believe if they have like special permission from Meta. So if you're a normal developer that doesn't have this permission, you still have to support Quest 1 on App Lab or on the store. And this is something that developers have actually complained about because the Quest 1 launched in 2019 with a processor that was actually 3 years old at the time. It was outdated when it was launched from a performance perspective, and Quest 2 came along with a processor that had been released earlier that year. So developers are saying that roughly maybe 5% of their users are actually on Quest 1 because Quest 2 vastly outsold Quest 1, and yet they have to put all of this time and resources into supporting this older hardware. So I really do hope actually the developers are able to release only for Quest 2. But the other hand of that is that I would repeat what I said in my editorial earlier last year, which was that Meta needs to have a way to bring these Quest 1 buyers forward into the current VR era. And the obvious way to do that is an Apple-style trade-in program. Meta really just needs to let people trade in their Quest 1 for, say, $100 or $150 credit towards a Quest 2. It's a win-win because it means those people can then continue to buy the latest games. They can continue to engage with something like Horizon Worlds that Meta wants them to use but doesn't support Quest 1. And it just seems like the alternative is to leave these early adopter customers behind with a paperweight over time.
Yeah, I wonder if they could do some kind of a credit system for software rather than hardware, right? Like it would be nice to discount upgraded hardware, but I could imagine it'd be easier for them to just give you a $50 store credit, right?
That's a great idea, but anything at all, anything other than the situation now where, the Quest 1 was replaced rather quickly in the grand scheme of things, around 18 months, with something that was vastly superior from a processing power perspective. It just doesn't feel right to ask people to be early adopters. Like, as you said, Mark Zuckerberg introduced this as kind of the ultimate VR form factor, and this was marketed very heavily. This wasn't a low-key headset. And then, people buy this, and then a couple of months later it gets replaced. It doesn't feel right at all.
Onakazi talking about the precedent of the Go and what happened there, and then Guy replying with John Carmack on, and the fact that the Quest 1 operating system is the same as the Quest 2. I don't think the precedent's going to be followed from the Go. What do you think on that, Heaney?
Yeah, I would completely agree. Go used a kind of older version of the OS that was different from the current situation. Go accessed its own store as well that was separate from the Quest store. Just the Quest 1, the Quest 2, and the Quest Pro use the same OS and they access the same store. So it does seem unlikely that you'll get some sort of open source version.
All right. Well, I think we're ready to move on to the next subject here pretty quickly, and I can't wait to hear Guy in our comments talking about the story after that. But The Verge was reporting that they heard or hearing that Roblox is in the works for release on Quest in late 2023. I told my youngest about this bit of rumored news, and it was remarkable how quickly and obviously like it made sense. When you realize, oh wow, wait, can I play Roblox in my headset and then I can take it off and go play it on my iPad or on my phone? And there's a lot of kids and teenagers across the United States. Well, I'll just say kids, because that's the real thing I really wonder about with this Roblox news, Heaney. Meta has a policy of appealing to those 13 plus. In fact, they instituted Rec Room. They enforced Rec Room to enforce this policy of not having junior accounts on Meta devices. What does that mean as we approach this period being talked about by The Verge here? We're lining up for a Quest 3. We would expect that this year. And what could be bigger than getting Roblox for that headset? It's really hard to imagine anything larger. How is Meta going to deal with this, and is this actually going to happen?
Yeah, there definitely is a strange paradox there where, as you say, Meta has in recent months been trying hard to enforce that 13 plus policy, and yet the majority of Roblox users are likely under 13, and this is something that is heavily marketed towards children. So Yeah, I always find it funny as well when you see Quest 2 on a younger child, and the proportion looks completely off. The headset is bigger than some of their heads in some cases, and it looks like, it's actually physically dragging them forwards with that half a kilogram weight. So maybe if Quest 3 is, as everyone expects, 100 grams or more lighter, that looks a bit more practical. And yeah, I do wonder if this timing does coincide with Quest 3 because, yes, Roblox is graphically simple, but for a VR headset, because there's so much freedom for creators to build in this and they can create at such scale and scope and have so many entities, it does seem like it would be very hard to get something like this running on the Quest 2's Gen 1 XR2 processor from 2020. And I wonder if Roblox, if this rumor is true, and again, this is just at the rumor stage, perhaps this will just be a Quest 3 exclusive. Meta was not shy about having Quest 2 exclusives, even when a lot of people still were using Quest 1. So I wonder if that's going to be what's required to get this running on a standalone headset.
We've talked somewhat about the 8 studios that Meta has acquired, these very experienced studios that could make quality content if they're, given enough time and have the right, I don't know, creativity as well as like, structure to really build uh, great products. Like they're experienced. All those studios have done existing work, but we have yet to see them actually produce a fresh VR game while under the umbrella of Meta. But we haven't heard about Grand Theft Auto, and we haven't heard about those Ubisoft projects in a very long time, despite getting announced at this point years ago. And I wonder if those things somehow evaporated, how big a deal Roblox would represent sort of in their stead or alongside those.
So Grand Theft Auto, I don't think is more than a year ago. It was about a year and a half at most, and a game like that you would expect to take a very long time. I'm only pushing back on this because you do often hear this line of thinking of, oh, this VR game was announced 2 years ago. We haven't heard about it, therefore it's dead. I mean, in this day and age, a massive scale AAA or even AA games take 4, 5, 6, 7 years to build. So that doesn't seem any more unexpected. You could argue that perhaps Meta announced them far too early and they should wait until there's something closer to release. But yeah, it is interesting to see the difference between the dichotomy between those kind of very polished, high budget IP applications like potentially Assassin's Creed and Grand Theft Auto versus something simple like VR chat and Rec Room and Roblox, where the significantly lower creator budget is actually what people are spending the most time in VR on. And despite all of the dozens of millions that are spent on those big flagship titles, that's not really what people actually choose to spend all of their time in.
It's just, it's kind of, you don't think of Grand Theft Auto as like a creator based online world. Like you're not moving things around and creating your own stuff. But it's still a massively, multiplayer sort of thing, right? Like it's still in the same very broad genre. And they're obviously appealing to completely different audiences, but it's still interesting to think about the where Meta puts its marketing and product push with this next headset, right? Like they have to figure out their own kind of best, safest customers to go back to after Quest 2 in order to kind of appeal to people that aren't going and picking up the Sony headset or the Pico headset or the latest HTC headset.
Well, I imagine it's going to be both. There are different types of people who want to buy headsets. Some of them are going to be the type that want to play simple but fun and engaging content like Gorilla Tag and Rec Room and potentially Roblox. And there's other people who are really only looking for those giant titles, the likes of the Vader Immortal series and Resident Evil and, maybe Assassin's Creed and those IPs and, Batman and all of those other kind of titles you expect and now Grid Autosport, I guess. But I guess they're going to want to go much further than just the same people that want to buy Quest 2. If we see the same progression, Meta's been very clear that they want to eventually have 1 billion people in VR. And you had a couple of million that got the Quest 1. And then now we have maybe somewhere between 10 and 20 million that got the Quest 2. I think they're going to be aiming for somewhere between, 20 and 40 million with the Quest 3. And that means they have to go wider and broader.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that commentary, and it feels weird to kind of compare Roblox to Grand Theft Auto, right? At the end of the day, but like the reason I do that is because there's incentives to get to a larger platform for all of these companies. Like they're all trying to appeal to the largest possible audiences, and that means trying to take, in some cases, time away from what people are doing in other apps. And I think of Fortnite as kind of like the cornerstone example, where if you're anywhere near the kind of genres that Fortnite is touching, you're in trouble, right? Like they're going to come after your audience again and again and again. And I think that's kind of a story we're going to come back to with this metaverse concept as a backdrop, right? Like the people are like competing for hours spent in the metaverse, if you really want to frame it that way. I hate using that term, but it can be framed that way. And if you're not like, if you're not getting the full cut of every dollar spent on your platform, that you're not necessarily going to support platforms unless they really pay you a lot of money to come to the table. Like I don't know, like it's a tricky thing. You can only focus on so many projects at once as well. So you've got to pick sort of uh, whether you're going to have a completely full cut of all your revenue or whether you're going to support a lot of platforms.
Yeah, I think we're still with Quest and with these other platforms like Pico, they're still in the era where the main priority isn't sustainable revenue, but on just user growth. It's, like in the early days of Facebook itself, before it even had any revenue coming in, their focus was entirely just let's make this big first and then figure out how to monetize it effectively. And I think, with the 10 to 20 million area we're in now, that's still a long way away. It's still two orders of magnitude away from Meta's goal of making this a billion size industry. And so those sort of revenue considerations are there. Yes, they can't make a completely unsustainable business, but I think the focus is still on how do we get people to buy these headsets, and more importantly, how do we get people to continue to use these headsets every week. It is interesting that just a few weeks after Tim Sweeney confirmed that Fortnite isn't coming to VR, that we get this news coming out. So I wonder if, sorry, this rumor coming out. So I wonder if this is something that's part of Meta's strategy to say, well, if we can't have Fortnite, at least we can have Roblox.
Yeah, and there's, of course, I talked about it in the article, but there's other things to think about. What Minecraft? We haven't heard anything on Minecraft in years. And I'm seeing Quentin in our comments making the comment that Roblox is absolutely going to come to Quest first because kids spend more on games than adults, and Meta needs a new moneymaker. That is an interesting perspective. And I think we should probably end this little segment on just noting the phrasing on this from The Verge. So this was reported by Alex Heath at The Verge, a sort of major reporter who's been reporting scoops on VR for years, and coming in their new newsletter there. And there was no sort of specific sourcing other than this language of saying that they heard that this is going to happen, or this was in the works. So that was sort of plans could change. Alex Heath said that them himself, and we have to just note that maybe nothing will come of this, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating because I don't think I've seen Heath being so vague before. Usually there's, someone familiar with the matter or a source within Meta or, Microsoft or Apple, but now it's just I'm hearing. I've never
Well,
heard him be that vague.
well, I noticed his title is deputy editor, and I think this new newsletter, it's a paid subscription newsletter for The Verge, is probably more personally written, right? Not in this sort of Verge voice, but maybe in this more direct voice. I noticed in the email when I subscribed to it to check on the sourcing of the news, it was like an email directly from Alex Heath at Verge. It was interesting, sort of very direct way of contacting your audience.
Yeah, so I think we can talk about that Intel news now. And as you say, it'll be very interesting to see what Guy says here because I saw him both on Twitter and on the comments of Intel's YouTube channel giving his thoughts on this.
Geek Godin, obviously the creator of Virtual Desktop, upon which, very much reliant on Wi-Fi speeds and Wi-Fi connections. Guy obviously is almost single-handedly created Virtual Desktop, and has some very, very strong thoughts on this bit of news. So, Intel's highest end Wi Fi chip can now directly connect to Meta Quest headsets. Heaney, you and I were talking about this a little bit. Why don't you break down for our audience exactly how this works and how this differs? And then I will read out any comments from Guy deciding to fight with this.
Yeah, so this Intel Wi-Fi chip, their highest end one, the AX1690, is in some high-end gaming laptops like the Razer Blade 15. You can buy it as a separate chip, which is a slightly different name for PCs, although almost no motherboards have the new connection standard that they use for it. So mainly you'll find this in laptops. And the idea here is that it has this new feature called Double Connect Technology, DCT, so it can maintain two entirely separate Wi-Fi connections at once. So one of those Wi-Fi connections is the standard old connection between the laptop and your router, which is used for the internet connection. You know, your router passes the internet over Wi-Fi through to your laptop, but the other can be used for a direct connection to your Quest headset. So instead of your Quest having to use its Wi-Fi signal to go from headset to router to laptop, be that last stage via Ethernet or Wi-Fi, it can now just connect directly to the laptop. And this is something that we actually saw in recent months come through D-Link's peripheral, that USB AirBridge dongle, which is $100. And it sort of does the same thing. It allows you to have a direct wireless connection between the headset and your laptop, in that case via USB. This is essentially the same thing happening, except it's built into the laptop. It's happening internally on the laptop's own antenna rather than separately. So, you know, if you don't already have a laptop with this, I don't think anyone's going to go out and buy one for it. But it is one of those things where if you do end up buying a gaming laptop that has this feature, it's going to be nice to have, because it means that you no longer have to worry about where your router is. You no longer have to have your laptop or PC connected via Ethernet to your router, because it no longer matters, because the headset is going directly to the PC. There is no sort of via the router. Now, I'm sure Gigon will point out, I haven't checked the comments yet because I still have these images up. I'm sure Gigon will rightly point out that if you already have a high quality setup for virtual desktop, where you have your PC connected via Ethernet to a nearby Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E router, there's very little advantage to this. There's not any magic sauce that will make this somehow better. But for the people who aren't able to have their laptop connected via Ethernet, for the people who aren't able to be near their router, or even people who are on the go. If you just bring your laptop along with you anywhere, even a hotel room, even to a friend's house, and they don't have internet or something like that, you don't have to worry about having a connection. It's just direct.
So, Guy's comment here was that you could already connect directly to a computer using a Windows hotspot, so it's nothing new. What's new is the dual band part.
Yeah, so you could, but then you would have to, in most cases on most PCs, forego the internet connection at that point, or it would be splitting the connections where, you know, it can only do one at a time. So that's not ideal for something that's latency and connection quality sensitive like VR.
Yeah, I can't remember where I saw this comment, but when we get to the Apple stuff, this will be relevant. But I do think a lot about the fact that Apple had routers back in the day. Like that was a big, small market for them when they were a smaller company, and they kind of moved out of that. And there's other companies now doing the control of the router data, and it just seems like we're entering a generation of VR where uh, and not just VR, but AR and everything else, where it would be nice if you could rely on very, very, very fast internet whenever you get close. And it seems like a problem smart software can help with. And I know there's a lot of companies out there. I can't decide whether to say router or router because I've got you in my head. But like, yeah, it seems like something that I would imagine Apple and others to compete again on in order to make this even better than this current system.
Well, I would expect that if Apple does plan to do Mac-based VR, which we have no indication that Apple does plan to do anything like that. All of the reports so far indicate that it will be fully standalone, and that the M2 chip will, be as fast as any of those baseline MacBooks anyway. So I doubt Apple will actually do that. But if they did want to, they could do this in a software solution that's built into Macs. That's something that I'm sure they could pull off. I think what this is building towards, though, is just a future where PC VR is a lot more seamless, because whether you use AirLink or virtual desktop today, there always is that problem of where is your router? And if your router is if it's 3 rooms down the hallway and there's a lot of thick walls in the way, it doesn't matter how good the software is. There is no software magic that will be able to solve a signal being degraded by that sort of distance and obstacles. This direct connection solution clearly is the future. I expect that eventually something like the Quest Pro's dock will have this kind of thing built in, so that even when you're just streaming your Windows or Mac PCs, Windows and monitor views to your headset, you can have that direct connection. Because the problem is you can just never rely on people having a consistent router quality. Some people are using these amazing Wi-Fi 6E routers that they bought for $100 or $200 and set up themselves and have wired by Ethernet. Great. If you're one of those people, you don't need anything like this. But let's be honest, most people are using the router that their ISP provided them, which in many cases is the cheapest router that their ISP could possibly find, and it's not in any sort of ideal scenario. So it's just another kind of way to make PC VR more seamless over time.
So, Guy in our comments saying average HMD VR latency less than 5 milliseconds is just a lie. It takes more time than this just to render the game, let alone encoding, decoding. Can you break down what we're talking about there?
Yeah, so Intel's chart here is obviously referring to the transmission latency only, which is, as Guy points out rightly, it's misleading for them to talk about this as the VR latency. That is only the wireless transmission latency. And again, as Guy rightly points out, there's a very, very careful usage here of up to 30 milliseconds. In other words, in saying, if you do have that situation where you have an ISP provided router 5 rooms down the hall and you're using the 2.4 gigahertz and it's having to retransmit constantly, you are going to maybe get up to 30 milliseconds transmit, but most people are not getting anywhere near that worst case. I think it's very right for Guy to point out that this is misleading marketing by Intel, and Intel should focus on what D-Link focused on in their marketing, which is everything I've just been saying, in that it takes out all of those extra steps and it takes out all of that work to have to get the ideal setup. You no longer have to get an ideal setup. They shouldn't be focusing on trying to pretend that this is somehow technically magically superior.
So I'm just going to read off Andrew Bosworth, the Meta CTO, his comment on Twitter, where he also said that their data, Meta's data, suggests that this technology would be an improvement for a meaningful percentage of Quest 2 consumers. Now, that's interesting. Like that's almost one of the strongest things they say about sort of the value of PC VR to their Quest 2 audience. Like they've largely moved on from PC VR, but to have them kind of give an indication that it's still interesting, it's still meaningful to some of their audience is a good sign. But I don't know. Airlink's days seem numbered, or AirBridge's days seem numbered.
Really, I don't get that. I mean, it's clear that Meta isn't investing in content anymore, but why would they be investing in partnerships like this? And why would they be releasing the AirBridge dongle with D-Link? And why would they be, adding a few months ago those extra stability features, frame rate insurance to AirBridge? It's clear that it's still
I'm
useful.
arguing. Sorry, go ahead. I guess I'm arguing that the push should be internal, right? Like it should be internal hardware that does this best and first, and they try to equip as many. What will be the branding, I guess, Heaney, of Meta compatible PCs? Like what label are they going to come at now that we're going full circle with this system?
Yeah, I think in the very long term, that is the future, but it's going to take a long time for this to trickle down into affordable gaming laptops. As I was saying, this is only in Intel's highest end chip, the AX 1690, which is, it's a Wi-Fi 6E chip that is in those really expensive gaming laptops. The one I looked at, the Razer Blade 15, was like $2,500 or something, and most gaming laptops are still sold around the kind of $1,200 range. So it will take years until people have this in their actual laptops. And in the meantime, a USB dongle seems like the ideal solution. But it does seem like such a shame that that D-Link dongle for $100 doesn't have Wi-Fi 6E, the 6 gigahertz, whereas this does. And obviously, if you get your own 6E router, it will.
Yeah, no, I think, sorry, I think I misspoke about the AirBridge, and people in the comments are bringing up. No, I think I'm just overly frustrated that it launched with incompatibility with Quest Pro, and it doesn't make any sense. And there's this follow up comment. Meta doesn't have enough focus. Quentin, I think that's what I'm speaking to there. I'm just this frustration that there's no overarching PC policy that's really clear to an audience. Guy is saying if you have the money to buy a high-end laptop, you likely have the money for a $35 dedicated router.
So yeah, you can get a Wi-Fi 6, not 6E, but 6 router for $35 on sale. That's not the standard price off sale. And again, it still comes back to that fact that this is then another device that you have to set up in a room with an Ethernet cable connected to your laptop. It's something that, yes, enthusiasts who are technologically competent and like to follow this sort of stuff and make sure they have the ideal setup can get something that is already great and they don't need to have these integrated solutions. But as you know, I feel like we always kind of come back to whether it's the AirBridge or this, these technologies are not for those people. These are to make sure that anyone, just an average person that says, I want to buy VR, I want to play wirelessly with my Quest 2 or my Quest Pro, what laptop do I get that can just do that? They can then now have a solution.
It's interesting to think about the minimum spec needing to have Wi-Fi in there, or its Wi-Fi speeds as like a more important thing going forward, right? Like, and I don't know, how do you convey to a user you don't just need this, you need also a graphics card that can run Half-Life Alyx or Flight Simulator. Like, if that's really the reason you're going and getting the PC, you've got multiple specifications to consider at this point.
I don't think this idea that was kind of popular around the launch of the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive in 2016, that PC gaming was somehow going to magically be able to turn into a consoleized experience through VR. I never believed in that vision, and I don't think it's ever going to come to fruition. I don't think you're going to get people who aren't technologically sort of clued up people who are into PC gaming magically somehow become, magically get an experience that is streamlined by just having, Quest compatible stickers put on the laptops. I think people that want that are going to get the PlayStation VR 2, and that's going to be the system that provides high-end VR in a consoleized experience. And the people who want, a streamlined Switch-like experience that is just one console that is wireless and cheap are going to get native Quest 2 and Pico. I can't see PC gaming becoming, magically easy to use just because of VR.
So we've got a couple people asking pretty standard questions that we get in and out, week in and week out, but I want to respond. We are not using the face and eye tracking inside of the Quest Pro, but we are wearing Quest Pro headsets. We've got little mic filters right over our mics to try to improve the audio quality. And but we're not active with the face and eye tracking. It's just really, really amazingly low latency work from David Heaney here in our studio to get that to look right. And when I look at him, my eyes kind of move in the expected way. I think we're ready to move on to the next subject. We've still got a lot to get through with this show. So Quest 2's GPU performance is now 7% higher than before, and this was done via a software update. 7%, that's pretty significant. That's not nothing. It's not, the quarter or double updates that we would expect generation to generation, but to get that kind of performance this far into the Quest 2's life cycle, that's going to give a little bit more oomph to, I don't know, people that might want to hold those headsets around for a couple of years and not upgrade.
Yeah, this was a very surprising one. This dropped in the second last week of December, so we hadn't had a regular show since then, so we haven't had a chance to talk about it. But yeah, this is fascinating. So on Quest 2, the system will automatically clock up and down the GPU's clock speed to give the running application / game the performance it needs without wasting battery life. Because if you were to keep the GPU pinned all the way to its maximum frequency all the time, you would just A, waste battery life, and two, generate heat that's unnecessary. So before this update, the maximum clock speed for the GPU in Quest 2 was 490 megahertz. And after this update, what they've done is they simply changed that maximum from 490 to 525 megahertz. And as Ian says, that represents a 7% increase in the maximum. So if a game isn't actually taxing the Quest 2, if you're playing something incredibly graphically simplistic, nothing will change here. But if you were playing a game that is taxing the Quest 2, and in the past, maybe you would have seen frame drops as it hits that maximum GPU frequency, but is still at 100% utilization, now the system can bring it up even further by 7%. The weirdest part here is, though, that this will only apply for now when you launch an application, then take the headset off and put it back on, or just turn it off with a little button on the side and turn it back on from standby to back on. Meta says that will be changed in the V49 update. Given that we're currently on V47, that could be quite a while, although it's possible they plan to skip V48. But yeah, this could be used by developers to slightly increase the resolution of their game, since they now have 7% more GPU power to work with, or they could just leave the game as is with no update, nothing at all, and it will just have more power and therefore less frame drops, more consistent frame rate.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to everyone watching with us right now. Please share, like, comment, subscribe, become members if you can. But yeah, please get this out to everyone. We're about to get into our CES stuff very soon. That's going to be a whole nother layer of discussion to talk about that whole experience and the things I saw there. Any comments you want to respond to there, Heaney, before we move on?
Well, a few people bringing up the concept of PlayStation VR 2 coming to Steam, but I think we'll leave that for another day.
I was going to leave it. I wasn't going to
know.
mention it, Heaney. I wasn't gonna take the bait. But I appreciate you talking about the commenters talking about PSVR 2 on PC. I noticed the comment pointing out that Steam, what is it, 0.02% or something of people used PSVR 1 on Steam. I still think that's magical. I kudos to those people. I'd like to interview the 0.02% people who went and installed that. Go and fill in your bingo cards. I want to say thank you to our sponsor, ValeVR. Let's put up their trailer. So yeah, thank you to our sponsor, ValeVR. ValeVR is a 5v5 tactical shooter game developed from the ground up for virtual reality. This might just be the next big VR first-person shooter. You can check out Vale on Steam, where fans are giving it very positive reviews with praise for its full-body avatars, gameplay, and physics. Developers are constantly responding to community feedback, and there's an active Discord group where you can connect with the Vale community. Vale VR is available now on Steam.
I almost thought it was an available joke, but no.
No, I'm just people. Right, I'm sorry if I'm not more enthusiastic when I'm reading off the sponsorships. I'm trying to get the right management of reading what's actually there while making sure it's coming across right. It's tough to be able to read off these teleprompters sometimes.
So a few questions here on that last story. Serious Goo asking, CM cooling, how does that work? Meta didn't actually talk about how this worked. Presumably they've done the tests and checked that this doesn't put the components at any issue or stress. Presumably, they found some sort of way maybe to manage the heat in other components. They were very vague about what actually made this possible. So I would actually love to know the answer to that. And Andrew Tech asks, will we see more games adding support for eye-tracked foveated rendering? Because obviously we saw Red Matter 2 use that to provide a 30% increase in base resolution. The answer there is that the newest Unity integration and SDK versions that support that are still a little bit rough around the edges. So developers are kind of hesitant to upgrade their projects there just yet. I think as that becomes, as more and more SDK versions are released and that becomes something that has just been available for many versions, that's something we'll likely see. But it's probably not a focus for developers because the vast majority of their users, the vast majority are on Quest 2, which doesn't have eye tracking. And the leaks so far suggest that Quest 3 will not have eye tracking. So this is something that only benefits Quest Pro users, which are a tiny percentage of their user base.
Yeah, people in the comments talk about my accidental puns. Yeah, it's usually accidental. I only intend about half my puns, unlike Kyle, who intends everything, every pun he makes. Um, are we ready to move on to the Bloomberg reports and Apple, or is there anything else in this subject? I think there's interesting strategy being applied to
The,
this, right? Like, how long
the
do you think Quest 2 is going to be on the market, Heaney?
Yeah, so the last thing I just wanted to point out in this story is Serious Goo has pointed out that the XR2 Gen 1's GPU is actually capable of 587 megahertz, and that's what you see in Pico 4. So Pico 4 has a superior cooling system to Quest 2, and thus, while Meta has narrowed that gap a little bit, developers can still bring a little bit more resolution out on Pico 4 than anything. But yeah, that is an interesting question, of course. How long will will Quest 2 be on the market? I strongly believe that it will be dropped when Quest 3 is released, but I think it will still be supported for years and years to come.
Like, would you expect that period to be longer than the Quest 1 period, like for
Much,
formal updates and support?
yes, much, much longer because as we were saying before, Quest 1 launched with a processor that was 2.5 years old, whereas Quest 2 launched with a processor that was something like 5 or 6 months old. So it's just the fact that Meta really should have released Quest 1 with a more recent processor, or, obviously this is impossible, but in an ideal world, released Quest 1 earlier. Quest 2, because it has a processor that's so recent, the same processor that's in headsets even releasing today. The Vive XR Elite is using the same processor as Quest 2, and it's just launching today. In fact, it hasn't even launched yet. So Quest 2, I think, will have, even though Quest 3 will be much more powerful, Quest 2 is powerful enough and recent enough that it will still be able to be a viable target for years to come. And also, as we said, Quest 1 sold maybe 1 or 2 million units, and Quest 2 has sold 10 times that, 10 to 20 million units. So there's just a much larger base of people that they will want to keep buying content. They'll want to keep them playing Horizon Worlds. They'll want to keep them on the platform in general.
Yeah, obviously the dropping of Quest 2 when Quest 3 comes on makes sense. There is that thing I always think about, Heaney, of trying to turn the old device into the lower end, cheaper model. But I don't think we're necessarily at that point. And then there was the other thing you talked about earlier, which was the buyback program. So this comment from Dunadim saying Quest 1 gang, yeah, Quest 1 is going in a collector's area. I've got the case for it. I saw one at one of the used game stores, and it's I think those things are going to be collector's items for a long time. Um, Hello, Alex. I saw you at CS. We're about to get to the CS portion of this. It was great seeing you. And yeah, what do you want to say there, Heaney?
Onakazi's, asking if the Vive XR Elite maybe uses the same XR2 Plus that's in the Quest Pro. According to HTC's spec sheet, no. Although I did note that XR Elite does have 12 gigs of RAM, so maybe it is, but that's still not a big difference. The XR2 Plus is not a dramatically different processor to the XR2. It is just the XR2 with the RAM moved off to the side for better cooling and support for more RAM. It's not. It's still that same 7 nanometer chip from 2020. It's not in any way radically different. And we were just talking about the clock speeds. That 525 megahertz that Quest 2's GPU maxes out is the exact same as the 525 megahertz that the Quest Pro's GPU maxes out. They are the same GPU. They have the same CPU cores. They are almost identical.
So I want to get to the Apple section of this and so we've got a full hour for the CS stuff here in a minute. But I do want to call out Christian's question because I think it's a great one for you, Heaney. We've had it before, and it's a good one to come back to all the time. So Christian asking, do you guys have any tools for devs to start switching to VR development? I've been doing web dev for years, and I'm still wondering if it's worth my time to start learning VR and AR. Now, the second part of that question, if it's worth my time to start learning VR and AR, I love that question. I'm just going to share a quick anecdote before I throw it to Heaney. I saw Neil Stevenson, the creator of Snow Crash, at CES. The person who coined the term metaverse. And he was there in the audience for Vive. I guess Vive is working with Neil Stevenson, And I walked up to him after the press conference and basically asked him if he could go on the record because he worked at Magic Leap and wanted to know what his thoughts on the Magic Leap situation was. And he said he couldn't be recorded or he couldn't give an interview. So I said, okay, can you? I can't remember. I asked him some other subject, and then he wouldn't respond on that either. I said, okay, well, thank you. Hopefully we can talk another time. And I walked away. And right as I'm walking away, this other guy comes up for, it's either at the beginning of the conversation or at the end of the conversation, but this other guy wants to pose for a photo with Neil Stevenson. And the guy says, thank you. You basically got me into this line of work. And Stevenson responds, well, I hope that was a good idea for you. And I love that way of thinking, right? Like, okay, so it is horribly difficult out there in VR and AR, and I don't want to be the at the same time I would take pride in being the reason someone got into VR development. I don't want there to be any kind of hyping that the market is any larger than it actually is right now.
Yeah, so that is obviously a question that no one can really answer as to whether it's worth your time. But the real question you're going to be asking yourself there as a web developer is, should you go for WebXR or should you go for native, Unity or Unreal Engine? The vast majority of content that people are actually using today on standalone headsets is made in Unity, and that is just going to be the case for a very long time. WebXR has become more convenient recently through the ability to launch a WebXR experience directly from your laptop or phone or PC to your headset, but it's still not what most people are using. But I would say if you are a web developer, you might as well start by playing around with it. So as James O'Loughlin points out in the comments, you can use the A-Frame framework by Mozilla, and you can use that with the 3.js engine and play around with that. Meta also has their own React VR framework. But really, you probably will want to start looking into native apps and playing around with the likes of Unity. And so just doing any kind of modern Unity getting started VR tutorial and following through and building something is probably the best way to start. But if you are an experienced web developer, I would say play around with WebXR and see what you can get done there first.
Great advice, and Guy making the joke, or I don't know how much of a joke it is, but stay away from WebXR. That would be my recommendation. Yeah, WebXR. We're gonna have to see how far it really goes. I'm routinely impressed by some of the things that come out of WebXR, but it needs kind of I don't know. It needs a killer app. It doesn't have that. I know they had that Moonrider app, which was a kind of a knockoff of Beat Saber, and it was pretty cool in WebXR, but nothing was done with that. And I think they took it offline because it was costing them a lot of money.
I think what's missing from WebXR right now is a monetization strategy. I think if the Quest browser gets support for the Web Payments API, and thus you can pay for things in the browser just as you would through the store. You just put in your Meta PIN, and that's it. That would radically incentivize WebXR development. But the problem is right now, if you want to actually make money, and there's nothing wrong with that, you have to feed yourself, you have to pay rent, and making money is something that every developer or the vast majority of developer needs to do. It's very, very inconvenient to do that in WebXR right now. Nobody wants to type their credit card details in their VR headset's browser while looking down through the nose gap, and you don't want to have some sort of system where you have to pay outside the headset. So if you actually want to just play around, sure, with WebXR, but if you really do want to make a viable product or business, native is the only real practical way to go for now.
Yeah, Christian saying that their question was a little bit more philosophical, wondering how big the market would be. It would be bad to invest years of my time just to end up being the new 3D TV. That analogy is a little bit easier to handle, right? It is not the new 3D TV. It is a fundamentally different medium, right? You interact with content in a natural way, the way you do in the real world. And I think if you frame your line of thinking of what you're learning in those terms, like you're learning how to build software that interacts with people more directly, right? Using their gestures, their voice, their commands. If you think about the software from that perspective, you're not investing time in the wrong thing. Like every computing system everywhere is learning how to interact with you in a more natural way in the ways you already express yourself. So if you think of breaking down, moving away from mouse and keyboard a little bit, maybe like that's maybe the way to think about it. Like, is it a bad investment of your time to build something that relies on mouse and keyboard input or touch input, or this more immersive direct interface? And how do you build a business on top of that is the ultimate challenging question.
Yeah, there are developers making real money in VR. VR is not like just some sort of gimmick tech like 3D TV. It is a real viable new platform, but it is a very new one, and we're still in the early days. And a lot less people own a VR headset than own something like a tablet or a phone, or even like a games console. So if it is something you want to make money for, you have to find a application or use case or game concept that people really want to pay for and use, and that's difficult. And it's not as open and large a market as those other tech, but definitely start playing around with it at the very least.
All right, so let's get to CES by way of getting through Apple first. So there are a couple of reports out there. There's a report from Bloomberg suggesting that prototype models of Apple's mixed reality headset are in third-party developers' hands, as well as the information reporting a lot about the expected new features of Apple's headset. Now, we've got to sort of deal with the elephant in the room, which is that Apple can always cancel its product at the last minute, but we don't think that's happening here. And if it's true that the device is in developers' hands, I think that's kind of the line you cross over into where you kind of go into a point of no return. But we've only got that as a kind of a rumor right now. We're going to need more confirmation that this headset is in the hands of developers. But Heaney, why don't you run us through the features there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus being put on this being in developers' hands, but from the other reports we've heard, this thing was already, getting very ready to enter mass production. It's already in the engineering sample phase. This is very much so real. This is not like years ago where there were all those rumors of Apple releasing a headset and they never came to fruition. This is something we've been following for years now, and there are multiple sources across the supply chain, across reliable journalists. This does seem to be real this time. So that report from the information detailed some of the specs that will reportedly be in this product, and the information is citing multiple sources. This is not just coming from one person inside Apple. This is coming from, I think, in total, the report had between 4 and 7, depending on how you count it, sources claimed from inside Apple. They are saying that it will have a 120-degree field of view. That compares to Quest 2 being around 96 and Quest Pro being around 106, so a wider field of view. Dual 4K OLED micro displays, and that compares to Quest 2 and Quest Pro having less than 2K per eye resolution. They're saying that it may use a waist tethered battery, so a wire will run down from your head to your waist instead of having the battery be on the back of your head like a Pico 4 or Quest Pro. And it will reportedly have eye tracking, face tracking, hand tracking, and even downwards facing cameras for leg tracking, as well as LiDAR sensors to mesh in your room for mixed reality. And the weirdest spec of all, or feature of all, I should say, a front display on the exterior that passes through those eye tracking cameras so that you can continue to see the person's facial expression even while they're in the headset. And that's something we saw Meta show prototypes from research for a few years ago, but Meta has not talked about that being on their product roadmap. And obviously, if it's done badly, it will look stupid and comedic, but if it's done well, it could kind of reduce that sense of local isolation that you have when one person is using a headset and others in the room aren't. So the report kind of finishes by saying that they are standing by their earlier reporting that this will be priced around $3,000. So it looks like this is not going to be some sort of mass market Quest killer. This is not going to be something that Apple's trying to make, VR or mixed reality mainstream. This is just a showcase product that gets it out to the world, gets it in the hands of developers, and shows what mixed reality can really do when integrated with Apple's end-to-end software stack.
I liked Free Sky's comment saying, "You know what's funny? I can't get my friends to buy a $400 Quest, but I bet they will buy the $3,000 Apple headset." Uh, that's obviously very joking, but there's an element of truth to that for at least a small percentage of people, right? And obviously, this question from Hump Funky at the bottom: who is it for? And that is going to be the kind of core question when this device actually comes out. People are looking at the Quest Pro and wondering the same thing. Um, yeah, was it Daniel Leeper's question? He had another one. Yeah, Guy saying it's such a waste of resources. Um, yeah, I don't know who it's for yet, Heaney, and I don't. It's hard for me to see it. I see how it changes things, right? You've talked about them using mixed reality for years as a differentiator, and until I see what input system they've landed on, I can't make heads or tails of how that's going to work.
So I think this is for the same kind of use cases that Quest Pro was built for, except reportedly it will actually have the specs and design to back it up. The Quest Pro, we talked a lot before it launched about this use case of having your triple monitors that you can basically give yourself a ideal workspace setup on the go. The problem, of course, is that it still has the Quest 2's resolution, and it just is not sufficient for that use case. I think anyone who's used the Quest Pro will say the resolution just isn't good enough for a practical monitor replacement. But this Apple headset will reportedly have a significantly improved angular resolution via those 4K OLED micro displays. And unlike Quest Pro, where you're having to install this Meta application and there's this kind of friction between using a Microsoft or Apple operating system with a Meta headset, this will all likely be completely integrated, just like Apple's other continuity features. This will be something that, you put your headset on and look at your MacBook and press a button, and instantaneously your MacBook's displays are now, you now have triple MacBook displays, and maybe it'll use the physical real display.
All right, I'll buy it, Heaney. You sold me. Thank you. I'll buy it. I'm done. I'm there. I'm gonna spend the $3,000. I'm gonna forego a house, and I'm going to live in Apple Reality Pro for a couple of years.
The other use case, I think, is that, again, another one that the Quest Pro was talking about, which is virtual meetings. That's something that this report mentioned. It's something that Bloomberg's report mentioned. The difference is that this will reportedly have leg tracking. It will have a wider field of view so you can see more people. It will likely let you very easily integrate Apple's existing iWork suite, like Keynote, into this system, and like FaceTime.
Are people just still making presentations in the 2020s? Like that's still like a work task. I thought that would have died with COVID, but
I think people still are. There's what Silicon Valley talks about being the mainstream current trends, and then there's what the thousands of boring businesses that people go to every day and use computers from 10 years ago kind of do every day. It'll be fascinating to see whether Apple's face tracking system is better, whether that M2 processor, that MacBook level processor that is reportedly in this thing, whether that will allow for significantly higher fidelity avatars. I really want to know if that leg tracking rumor is true, because then you don't just have these upper body torsos of Meta avatars, but you also then have your legs in the fold. I just think even if this was just a Quest Pro in specs, but it had all of Apple's software polish and integration, and to quote some of Meta's detractors, the software wasn't terrible, it would still be a compelling product. But the fact that they're going to do this in reportedly a lighter headset that has double the angular resolution and wider field of view and a processor that is like 2 or 3 times more powerful, it just seems like, I don't think the core idea of the Quest Pro was wrong. I just don't think it had the hardware to back it up. And if Apple has the hardware to back it up and better software, that is a compelling product. But again, it's not mass market. This is the first generation. I don't actually think lots of people are going to buy this at $3,000. But what happens when 2 or 3 years down the line, there's another Apple headset that's $1,500, and then 2 years after that, $1,000, around the same price as the MacBook Air?
Yeah, so Guy was talking about the external screen that supposedly shows your face on the external side of the headset. That was what he was referring to when he was saying the waste of resources. And people are pretty divided over whether that's going to be a must-have feature or a gimmick, and I cannot wait to kind of test it. I tried something called Kokomo at CES from Canon, and uh, I like Heaney, we tend to try to focus on the things that work, and amplify the things that work. I wanted to see what this system was, and they face scanned my avatar, and then I went and saw did a live video call with someone in another location. Like, that's a hard problem to solve. And I tried a Google research project at SIGGRAPH years ago, where you did the same thing. You did a scan of your head, and then they replaced your head on your avatar. That, if you want nightmare fuel, that's a good way to do it. If you don't do it right. Um, and then Guy also adding that 4K per eye micro LED should be a major upgrade in terms of resolution. I think good enough for replacing a monitor.
Yeah, it should be. I think if Apple really does have these specs, it will be the first headset that consumers can buy that does finally reach that threshold. And I think that's going to convert a lot of the skeptics to that use case. On screen now, if you're a viewer, obviously not if you're a listener, but if you're a viewer, you'll see Meta's research from a few years ago of reverse pass through, this concept we're talking about of having an external display that passes through the eye tracking cameras. And I think it really does just depend on the implementation. If the implementation is bad, it will be nightmare fuel. But if it's done well, it connects people in the room more. It solves that problem that Tim Cook was reportedly always kind of very annoyed about with opaque headsets, which is that you are just disconnected from everyone else in the same room. But I wonder, how much does it add to the cost? How much does it add to the reported engineering complexity that has apparently delayed this headset by around 2 years now? And is this something that's ever going to be practical to be in mainstream headsets that people can actually afford? Or is this one of those things that's going to be in that 3,000 headset but get dropped when Apple is faced with competition? And, if Meta does get its act together with software quality and simplicity, and it's offering, a lot of these features in a $400 headset, will Apple just decide this isn't worth the cost in a few years?
Yeah, it is a really hard. You would think that the path forward to smaller headsets would kind of get rid of the need for. I mean, obviously, we're seeing it here. Like, this is kind of like imagining where you're just doing the HMD, and I don't know. Like I said, I should find the image and put it up on our TV to show what the Kokomo headset looked like. But it's not good if this doesn't match up right. Um, I think that's a good transition to start talking about CES. You ready to get into it, Heaney?
Yeah, let's talk about CES. And I think if I'm right, we're going to start by talking about Lynx R1.
Well, yeah. So I missed a couple face-to-face demos at CES. I had a couple days there in Las Vegas to get to as many demos as I possibly could. Got to see some really interesting things. Um, Lots of things that showed promise in different ways, but also just recognizing how hard it is to do these things at the level they need to find a real market is constantly holding back some of these ideas. But Lynx R1, right at the outset of CES, they announced that they are starting to ship to their earliest backers. Now, that is a big deal, Heaney. This is a long time coming. Do you want to recap what this headset is compared to the rest of the market?
So this was supposed to ship around a year ago, almost a year ago. And the pitch for this headset is that, it was announced before the Quest Pro was announced. And had it launched on time, it would have been the first mixed reality headset. And by mixed reality, I mean a headset that has a VR style opaque display, but uses high resolution color cameras on the exterior to pass through a reconstruction of the real world. Lynx was the first to announce a consumer product that uses this concept. They were not the first to ship. As I said, Quest Pro got there first, but they are now shipping, and it is essentially a lot cheaper than Quest Pro. So it's difficult to see what the wider market potential of this is, but if they can attract a lot of the appealing mixed reality content that may emerge in the coming years for the likes of Quest Pro and Quest 3, I really hope they have a place in the market still. The problem is, I just wonder, have they now gotten to the point where they're so close to Quest 3 that a lot of people who would have otherwise bought Lynx are going to wait for Quest 3? Because reportedly, Quest 3 will have this same mixed reality capability, but with a much more powerful processor and at a lower price than Lynx, because Lynx is using that same XR2 Gen 1 that we've just discussed, being in Quest Pro in a slightly modified version, and in Vive XR Elite, and in Pico 4, and in Quest 2. So essentially what you have here is kind of a midpoint between Quest 2 and Quest Pro, but without the Quest platform. And as a purely XR mixed reality device, yes, but how does it actually compete in the wider consumer market is I just don't understand.
Yeah, there is a lot to expect there. Artful right at the bottom of our comments saying that they were supposed to get a survey as a Kickstarter backer but did not receive it. We'll have to follow up and see where they are on their sort of delivery there. I did go and find, let's see if I can pull it up, the image of Kokomo that I took off of their presentation. And I wanted to show that. Yeah, here we go. So this is what you see when you're inside the headset. Yeah, I just wanted to give that visual. That's
Wow.
this. All right, so I took this still off of their like presentation that was up on the press conference screen, and I'm only showing it because it is representative of what I saw inside the headset over at the Canon booth. All right, so let's get that image off the TV and go back to our comments as we move on.
I'll put up an image of last CES. This was me at CES last year trying out Lynx. This is the transparent edition that some Kickstarter backers got. What I would say is that the mixed reality in this is actually better than the mixed reality in Quest Pro. So, from a perspective of the actual resolution and clarity, Lynx is doing very impressive work here. And if you're just someone who does not want to pay $1,500, but you do want a mixed reality headset, you want a headset that can show your real world in color, you're maybe a developer, you're a business, you're someone who needs this for a niche use case, this is going to be a great option in the market. It's just, unfortunately, because of the global supply chain crisis that has affected so many hardware startups, this is just shipped so much later than they originally had intended to ship. This is coming into a market where we now have the big players releasing products that have the same capability. And yes, Lynx was first to prototype it, or Lynx was the first to publicly prototype it, but it doesn't matter if you can't actually ship. And I do feel really bad for all of these hardware startups that in the past 2 years have just been destroyed by this supply chain crisis, because suppliers of these components that go into these products have always, and they always will, prioritize the big companies. They do not want to lose out on good fortune and goodwill with the big companies. They don't want the big companies to go and look for other suppliers, or worse, as Apple does in many cases, just try to do the whole thing in-house. And that means that Lynx and other companies have just been put to the back of the queue, and that's the unfortunate reality we're in.
Yeah, I'm seeing Skiva talk about the pledge to not have tracking, to not use that data. That was also at the end of the HTC presentation. They made a similar sort of appeal to not using data in the same way as other platforms. I think at some point, Heaney, we're gonna need data, security researchers to take closer looks at these VR headsets and verify some of this stuff. And I know we've got Guy Godin in our comments who kind of takes a software stance in his software to not track info. But like to the platforms that actually build these hardware devices that we put on our heads, the analytics that they put into these systems helps them make the products better. And it becomes a difficult thing, like how much detail they actually get out of their data, or how much they need to actually get these products better. It brings me back to Apple, I think, a lot, Heaney, about just how Apple's going to fit into our lives and how they're going to do that without that data necessarily at their fingertips.
Yeah, well, Apple does still collect the same kind of analytics as a lot of these bigger companies. Apple's privacy commitment is in some ways real, and in other ways, a very clever and curated marketing campaign to try and distinguish themselves. I have some great questions here from Skiva and James O'Loughlin. And Skiva points out that this has ultra leap hand tracking, and that relates to James O'Loughlin's question of how is the hand tracking compared to Quest 2 and Pro. And so that is a great point because I do need to point out that this thing has much better hand tracking than either Quest 2 or Quest Pro. This thing has dedicated hardware via Ultraleap for hand tracking. It's not just in software. And when I actually tried this, that was the thing I was most impressed by. It was dramatically better than anything I tried before, best in class for hand tracking. So again, there is a lot of good things there are a lot of good things to say about Lynx. It is There's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's coming out now where it may be something like just over 6 months until Quest 3 comes out. And if Quest 3 is cheaper and much more powerful and has the mixed reality and has the hand tracking, it just kind of kills a lot of that market appeal of Lynx that had Lynx come out a year ago, it really would be one of those things that a lot of wider consumers would want because you would have been able to get these features that nothing else offered. But if those features are just around the corner from the bigger players at cheaper cost, that's a lot harder of a sell.
Any other comments you want to respond to? Are we ready to talk about XTAL?
Artful pointing out that the Lynx R1's prices creeped up to now around $900, so it's even starting to lose that price advantage. So yeah, I guess the last thing I want to say about this is obviously Lynx R1. I'm very curious, in a post supply chain crisis world, can they make it to Lynx R2 and can it be competitive with the bigger players?
I when I see this product and you talk about the timing, right? Like they're lined up in all the right ways over open source and picking sort of the right trade-offs as far as like input and display. Like it's all in the right place. But like I'm worried that the cost of kind of building a fully fledged platform with developer support is a little bit beyond what a startup can do these days. I did just let's talk about the Vrgineers latest, the demos. So I just uploaded the wireless version of this to the back end if we want to show how big their prototype was at CS, because it was a large amount of hardware on my hip, or held strapped over me. But it was wireless. So inside of this on my side was a wireless transmitter, and then it piped up to this super wide field of view headset. It could only stream at a like a lower hertz rate, and the visuals were not, I think, the full. It wasn't the full resolution that goes to this headset. Still kind of interesting to see this kind of massively high-end system that you might use for a super high-end training simulator to at least have that option wirelessly. I'm getting the sense, because these are such small number orders and they sell for so high cost, that the developers behind this, the creators, work on it and hand tune it over many months. Do you think that's a fair expectation from their hardware?
Yeah, this is a headset that is unashamedly not mass market. I don't have the price on me, but I believe it's somewhere around $10,000. And last year CES, this was my favorite headset I tried, and this still remains to this day, in my opinion, from everything I'm aware of, the best VR headset that money can buy. Here's me last year trying it out in a flight simulator experience, and the reason behind that is that it's achieved something that no headset I've tried has ever achieved, which is wide field of view without distortion. And it was truly a magical experience to try that. Obviously, there's the Pimax headsets that had around 150, 160 degree horizontal field of view, but you had that horrible fishbowl distortion around the edges. Pimax have claimed to have solved that in their newer headsets. I have not tried those. You can talk about that in a little bit. But this XTAL headset is 180 degree horizontal field of view, which is it's just stunning to try. and with no distortion that I could notice. It was something I didn't even think would be technically possible anytime soon. Yes, it's $10,000, but if you are a aircraft manufacturer or an air force or one of these organizations for which that is actually cheap, this is going to be able to replace or at least train far many more people than your old fashioned $5 million simulator setup could. And yeah, it's just incredible to see this, and I can't wait until the day in the long term future where consumer headsets have this, because even if you are very bearish on VR, even if you think that in its current iteration the tech just isn't there to be compelling, I can't imagine someone putting on a headset like this and not saying, holy swear word. Like, it is stunning to have that field of view.
Yeah, I guess I just have to say the wireless experience, what I saw, I think was way different than what you saw wired because of all the constraints of wireless transmission. And I'm curious to see how far they can take it sort of before CS next year, because they are such limited run and like military sort of customers. That's kind of the timeline where we do see new versions of them coming out is CES every year. They kind of uh, roll out new things at the end of the year. We are building towards the sort of finale of the show as we move over the next half hour, where we're getting into some of these hands-ons. Um, yeah, the simulator, the fact that you can climb into this actual motion platform and then have the added field of view, like that's a niche within a niche within a niche, but it's an extremely important like task to pull off right. And so like you've got millions of dollars of equipment flying through the air, getting first person cockpit experience that matches that experience as closely as possible. The sky is almost a limit on how much you can pay for it.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about this is I don't really get the point of it being wireless. Most of the use cases that you can think of for this thing, I don't think the wire would particularly matter, especially for all the seated use cases. And this is quite a heavy and hefty unit. But I guess if you were producing some sort of room scale or standing up simulation experience where field of view mattered a lot, maybe something like this would be appealing. But did they talk much about what the use cases they see for the wireless unit being?
Yeah, everything was like for, I have to go back and read what the actual quote was, but it was for those industrial use cases where like you can imagine actually being with a piece of equipment and getting away a few feet further from your PC makes a lot of sense. I think there are a fair number of like show floor or uh, construction or like mechanical, that's the word I'm looking for, mechanical based situations where you're working with real physical equipment where you might need to be a few more feet away from a PC and it makes more sense. um, any comments we should respond to before we move on?
Just Sampler mentioning that, as you mentioned earlier, maybe some people didn't hear, this wireless unit does drop the resolution. Normally this thing is 4K per eye, but with the wireless unit, it lowers to 1440p per eye. So as you alluded to, there are technical restrictions here. I don't think there's any known technology on the market that would be able to pump out uncompressed wireless 4K per eye at the kind of refresh rate this thing's running at.
Two of those Intel chips inside your PC. I don't know how that works.
Well, yeah, that's compressed, but yeah, I get what you mean. It's maybe with future wireless technologies, it is something that every CES seems to show major improvements on, and I guess there's some of those laser light wireless technologies that are kind of like through the air fiber optic light. But yeah, we'll see.
So I want to talk about the ShiftAll and Panasonic stuff that was in a whole section over in the Panasonic booth. Went over and they've got a bank of these headsets in various configurations. So how do I pronounce this, Heaney? Is it darn it? I'm gonna have to be awkward about this for a few more weeks as I try to drill it into my brain that it's David, not Heaney. David, is it Megane PC VR headset from Panasonic subsidiary?
I don't know. I just assumed it was MeganeX, but maybe Megane. Who know? If any of your commenters know, please tell us. But I would read that as Megane.
I should go and get I need to go pull them off of Twitter, the screenshots I put of the little text they've got next to some of their products at CES. So I tried out a couple of these. One was rather weird. It actually had like a secondary set of cameras mounted to the front of this. And it was like for low light computer vision tasks. So you had the cameras directly in front of your eyes, and you could look around and see like the bounding boxes as the AI was recognizing various objects in your space. It was interesting to think of that use case for this, of kind of like having goggles over your eyes that are able to see for you. Um, and then I did try sort of like a little demo where it was an interactive thing with things floating around me. And the weird thing about these glasses is they've got the diopters on them, at least in certain configurations. So there's these little sliders on the bottom, and you rotate them, and it's just like it's similar to what's on the latest HTC headsets. But those diopters, if you don't like I know Meta, I think, has some research, or they found like only a certain percentage of people ever touch the IPD slider on the device. And you kind of have to figure that into your overall design choices of how many people are actually going to tune this thing. So if you add an IPD slider as well as a diopter slider to get the prescriptions just right, you're requiring everyone that puts on your device to have to adjust those two sliders as well as the strap on the headset. You have to finely tune this. But when it got in, it was very, very interesting to see the visuals on this device. Like I'm gonna have to see more traditional content with the headset in order to get a good feel for how the field of view and comfort of the device feels. But like, it's strange. It's a different optical experience. All of these, some of these that we'll talk about next, uh, are like some of the Pimax stuff. It's a different, like your eyes need to focus in different places. And having, coming from uh, almost a decade of experience with a certain fixed focus headset design, with my eyes getting to focus at a certain level of infinity, like I don't know how ready my eyes are to adapt to some of these new optical systems. It's going to take more time than you get out of a CES demo of 15 or 20 minutes to grasp kind of how it makes your eyes focus differently.
So,
But it was interesting. I'll say that at least.
so I think it's important to note that the commentators first are telling us that it's pronounced Megane, which is maybe I'm getting that even wrong, Japanese for glasses. So that makes a lot of sense given that they're going for a glasses form factor. We should point out though that the diopter adjustment is not actually present in the MeganeX that people can buy. It is only in the business edition, which does not have a price yet, and they haven't even said whether it will be sold to individuals.
Well, and Onakazi saying no clue what diopter setting I would have to use. So that was the cool thing, at least using them. It was easy to do it on site, right? Like I was able to put the headset on, get it onto my eyes, and then adjust the diopters till it looked as absolutely crisp as possible. And yeah, I want to see. I want to see that more. We have to get these headsets compatible with prescriptions, and uh, I'm that's a big task that has to be done, I think, to open up the market to larger audiences. Um, when I saw this a couple of years ago, and I used the image for my profile photo for a couple of years, it's the way I framed it was these are classes in search of a platform, and I still feel that way right now. Um, I would love to see it like HoloRide, the HoloRide demo I did at CS. They put me in a car. It was in an HTC, I think, Vive Flow, and then I was riding around Las Vegas um, with the world mapped onto my virtual experience in a very strange way, where my head was actually 3'd off. I couldn't actually lean this way in HoloRide, yet the world was still moving in 6'd off around me. So I was still moving positionally through space in a comfortable way, even if these little movements weren't actually mapped correctly. It was an entirely comfortable experience with that Vive Flow headset. This this is the type of glasses that would be really, really cool to see used in that kind of use case.
Yeah, it would, but I think when we talked about this being in search of a platform, that was under the assumption that this was going to be a mobile or standalone system because of how it was kind of talked about at the time of connecting to a phone. But just to be clear, this as a product that has now been announced for $1,700 is a Steam VR PC VR headset. So it has built-in inside-out tracking via these cameras on the front, so you could use it for solely games that don't have track controllers, like say a simulator or something like that. But it also has an included in the box lighthouse tracking adapter that you can attach to the top of the headset, and then you can go and purchase Valve Index controllers, and as long as you have those base stations, you can then just use this as a PC VR headset just like any other. But obviously, if you include those base stations and controllers, you're getting up to close to $2,300. But as we'll talk about in a second, they actually are coming out with their own controllers too, with a unique idea.
Well, all right. So I hope you have the image for that, Heaney, because yes,
Yeah.
they had this transformable VR controller. There's a video out there that Palmer Luckey, the Rift creator, demonstrating these pretty quickly. Basically, you strap them to your hands. They strap on very much like index controllers, and you put your hands in there, get them tight, and then you can flip the piece out of the way of your hand, go grab something, even type on a keyboard, and then flip it back into place, and you've got everything there. Very, very cool idea. The actual prototypes that I saw didn't look like they were functional. They looked like they were just models to prove the concept out. Like I didn't think there was anything actually going on underneath the buttons. But it was still a really, really cool idea to imagine this. It also, like, I do wonder about just like turning your hand over. If this piece flips back into place when you don't mean it to, it could be pretty aggravating, right? Especially if you've got a hot drink in your hand. Now your controller is now falling into your hot drink, but obviously if your hot drink is going to flip over, that's going to happen anyway. So, uh, this
It
is
should
very much the whole area. It felt very R&D. It was the most R&D area of the entire CS show floor that I saw. All the Shift-All products, all the Panasonic glasses. What I saw was still this idea that they're searching for what the use cases are for this particular platform.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's not. It's. I think that comes back to what I was saying a second ago. This isn't the platform. It isn't a software solution at all. It's all just hardware for Steam VR. This is for PC VR gamers, and James O'Loughlin saying so much expensive hardware. I don't think Shift-All has any ambitions to become a software level provider or to make this into a standalone headset. But there are people who use VR chat for hours and hours a day, and maybe some of those people are willing to spend $1,700 for a headset that feels just like a pair of glasses on their head, and maybe they want a controller that they don't have to constantly take on and off to interact with the real world. And these are supposed to come out later this year. So I don't know, they must be working on a very aggressive timeline if they're going to really get that out, if it really was just a non-functional prototype at CES. But I do love the idea. I love the idea, and it should be possible to make this mechanically sound such that it won't rotate, that you do actually have to do a hard accelerating flip motion to get that the flip back round. And yeah, this is something I'd love to try out at some point. And I
Well,
hope that we see some idea of this in future controllers, because the idea of having to strap on and strap off controllers is a big friction point.
yeah, I love the idea that you can switch modes this quickly, right? Like using a controller in your hand and using hand tracking are completely different modes. And when we close out the show, when we get to the last few subjects, when I talk about HTC, I'll talk about this combination of using a controller and hand tracking, and it really is kind of the very kind of cutting edge of what VR systems can do. And I don't know, I guess it's a little bit off subject, but like I keep thinking, Heaney, about the idea of object detection and how fundamental it's going to be to open up VR for the next generation of people, right? Like, it's such a stupid example, I suppose, but I want to be able to like touch an object in my house and say share. And I want that object now to be viewable to you, right? And I would love that to be possible for my pets, right? Like it would be so amazing to have my pet here as a 3D object roaming around and you able to see it. And if you've got an animal over at your place, we could have our pets sitting here together, even though we're in other places. But being able to selectively pick any object around you and bring it into your space, like I do think over time that's going to we're going to wonder how we lived in VR without it. And the fact is we didn't, right? We didn't spend time in VR because we couldn't do that. And this product looks like such an interesting kind of like when you've got that software feature, then this becomes very, very useful.
Well, that is something that is in the realm of research, and it was actually that exact demo was shown at the most recent MetaConnect conference at the end. Michael Abrash was showing Mark Zuckerberg exactly that. Today, that requires panning your phone around the object and then doing offline compute on a powerful GPU server for hours. But I imagine in the 2030s, that is going to be something that is part of every consumer device. There are two very different levels of difficulty there. Scanning in a static object, like a plant or a can or something like that, or a baseball bat, and then scanning in and tracking in real time a moving dynamic deformable object like a pet. I think that's something that's going to take another 5 or 10 years after that, but it's definitely something that will eventually be a big part of VR. I completely agree. And it's not only about sharing it, it's about being able to use that as your controller, because obviously any given controller is only useful for a limited set of applications. And when you come to training in VR for enterprise companies, they're always using these custom controllers with, a Vive tracker stuck on top of it, or one of HTC's new inside out trackers for the Vive Focus 3. And if you could get rid of that idea, if you could just pick up any object in your house and use it for a controller, so you're playing a golf game and you go and pick up your real golf club, or you're playing table tennis and you literally just pick up a table tennis paddle, that completely transforms what's possible in VR. But it is something that will take some significant advances in machine learning in the next few years.
Yeah, and I saw Skiva saying it did seem to sort of stay in place once you flipped it in position. And I like Skiva's enthusiasm, saying I want these controllers. Yeah, the thing that why focus so much on that software element, right? Like this looks like such a cool solution if you are spending those extended times in VR, right? Like even if you take the headset off, you could still leave the straps on for a minute to go do something outside of VR, and then you come back and put the helmet back on or the glasses back on, depending on how slim your device is. And then going, this idea of this person talking about using a mech, right? Like it's such a cool idea to imagine being in sort of a social experience like we're having here, and then having this like mechanical flip into mech mode, and then you're ready to go in a completely different experience is a really compelling idea.
Ready to talk about your impressions of Pimax Portal?
Oh man, are we there? Are we going to get there? Wow, yeah. We've got two subjects left in our rundown. I will get into more of CES next week. It was a heck of a thing to travel and get there, cover everything, or at least see everything I possibly could, and then get back out. And I'm still processing a bunch of those demos. But I did get out my impressions of Pimax, and I think it's really important that we talk about where they are. So it was one of the first demos I kind of got to at CES. I knew they would be showing off their Pimax Portal View kit. At CES, I suppose I should just add the context that we've got emails going back and forth with Pimax a little bit over the months and years, where we as journalists trying to help shed light on what this company is doing are constantly trying to reach out to them and get clear communications about what they're doing and where they actually are. And right now, as we speak, they're in the final days of their Kickstarter project. So if you're listening to this on podcast form, it might be after they've finished the Kickstarter project for this product. They were closing in at about $400,000 from a $200,000 goal over the last couple days. And they're pitching something that is more or less very, very, very similar to the Labo VR product, where you take a Switch, you take off the Joy-Cons, you put the Switch into a cardboard holder, and then you hold the cardboard holder up to your face. That's what Labo VR was. And then Daydream View, you kind of did the same thing with a phone. You take the phone, you put it inside this view, this soft fabric holder, and then you put the soft fabric holder over your, the headset over your eyes, and you've got a VR experience. These are years old ideas by now, and Pimax is resuscitating that idea and shipping it as a new product. So for $300, I think, on Kickstarter, they are promising to ship the Switch kind of unit, the handheld controllers and device. And then for about $450, they're promising to ship the whole kit that we're seeing here in this trailer, where you've got controllers, you've got a headset, and you're able to do in theory, 6DoF VR. Let's throw up the image here of the controllers. Where are they? Yeah, okay. So that video trailer we just showed shows it's either that trailer or the video that's actually in their Kickstarter video, shows the sleeve with a controller that goes into the sleeve, and then this controller is the unit that you hold in your hand together, and it's tracked by the headset. So in my demo, this is what they show in their promotional materials. This is the hardware that was actually tested in VR. So I put this on my head, and these controllers I held in my hand. But you will notice, looking at these controllers, they don't have the Joy-Con-like attachments inside of them. These are, I walk around the Pimax booth. There's two sets of people. There's like sort of the United States or English-speaking media professionals, that are working for Pimax to explain things. And then there's the actual employee, like the core employees of the company, the organization itself, Pimax. And I had to run around to ask my questions to find out what's going on. So I go to the U.S. staff or the English-speaking staff and ask about the controllers. I was told that these are the Crystal controllers, the Pimax Crystal controllers, not the ones for this headset. So I could not actually test out at CES the controllers that they're showing in their Kickstarter video. And in addition, tracking wasn't great. It did seem to track, when this was on, the controllers tracked decently, but the head tracking kept losing my head, kept showing me in the wrong location. At one point, I was flying off over the Grand Canyon when I meant to stand right in place. Yeah, let's see what the comments are, and then I'll talk a little bit more about my broader thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I think the important context here is that Pimax is claiming that they're going to ship this with those sliding controllers later this month. So if they can't even demonstrate that yet, I don't understand why do they keep, I don't want to use the word lying, but why do they keep saying that they're going to ship things on a time frame that is clearly not realistic, when all they're going to do is just destroy the next wave of goodwill that they've gotten from people. Maybe they do pull a miracle off, and for some reason, despite not showing this last week, they are going to somehow ship those controllers by the end of the month. But yeah, that tracking being poor is really worrying, because inside-out tracking is still hard, and it's something that you really would expect in a product for this price to be not just good, but excellent. So if it's so bad that it's showing visible drift, that is deeply worrying.
Yeah, I'm seeing someone from Open Brush talking about their experience. So I tried two pieces of software in here. I believe one was OpenBrush, and the other one I didn't catch the name off of it. Someone in my comments said what it was. I'll just call it a painting program. It's a pretty general, at this point, TiltBrush itself has been open sourced, and that core software is making its way into a lot of different pieces of software. So I might as well just call it the core tilt brush experience is what I saw or tested briefly painting just with in the open air. But like as I'm moving around, it's staying in place as I move, trying to lean around this artwork I just put in place. And then I leaned all the way around and it shifted completely in place another time. Yeah, I don't mean there is all right, so a lot of the other stuff we're talking about in our show here, Heaney, like the Quest and the Quest software, the HTC Vive and the HTC Vive software, like you can get to good tracking with a certain amount of effort. But to get to great tracking, it's extraordinarily costly and expensive, I think, to get that engineering power. And these headsets, what we talked about just in a previous segment, is these headsets need or should get even better tracking for even more things in the coming years to access an even larger market. And what I saw at CES and what has kind of been building over years is if you don't get that basic tracking right from the start, everything that follows is kind of like doesn't matter, right? Like if you don't get that core fundamental right and great, it's pretty frustrating to say anything else about that particular product.
Yeah, these are hardware companies trying to play what is increasingly a software game. And it is why it's such a shame that Google's Daydream project died out, because the problem is that we're still in this situation where every hardware maker that wants to release a standalone device, a mobile device, has to build up their own platform. There are now three entirely separate standalone VR platforms when Vive XR Elite launches. You've got Meta Quest, you've got Pico, and then you have Vive XR. So this with Pimax is an entirely fourth platform. And when I say platform, I'm talking about the tracking software, the system software, the store, all of these elements coming together. If there was an alternative, if, for example, Pico licensed out their platform to any headset maker that wanted it, then Pimax could just run the Pico software and tracking technology and store. But the problem is then Pimax isn't going to get that funding from the store, so they have to add a higher hardware margin. Or HTC could provide it. Theoretically, Meta could provide it. That did seem when Google had Daydream like that was going to be the future, but that is the problem now. You cannot just look at the spec sheet of a headset you want to buy if it's a mobile headset. You have to look at the entire software stack and platform that's going along with it. And it is a big barrier to competitors being able to emerge. It's something that requires not only money and resources, as you said, but requires time. Facebook has been working on inside out tracking since 2014, 2015. It has been, working directly on mobile inside out tracking since at least 2016, 2017. This is something that, when the Quest 1 launched, there were a lot of tracking issues. And in the months following, those were improved and improved and improved. Then Quest 2 got better again. And then Quest Pro is at the point where the inside-out tracking is essentially flawless. Even Pico 4, which has all of that resources from ByteDance and all of that cooperation with Qualcomm, still doesn't have that rock-solid tracking quality that Quest has. I wonder if there's a room for a kind of software company here that specifically focuses on this. We know that Occipital was working on this, but someone needs to basically build a tracking system that is as good as Meta's and then license it out to these companies so that you don't have to worry, has Pimax somehow built a tracking system?
I wish I knew better about Blender and its sort of structure, but isn't that kind of like a project that is able to do a lot because it's got such a broadly supported base of open source stuff underneath the surface? Like I know there's open libraries for computer vision, but something should grow out of that to enable some of this stuff across multiple headsets soon, I would hope.
Yeah, there are. The problem is that a lot of those open source projects are focused on robotics where you don't need any of the quality of VR. VR inside-out tracking is extraordinarily hard. I think people forget that it's not just about building. Even if you build an excellent inside-out tracking system, it's still not likely good enough for VR, because not only does the latency have to be essentially nothing, but the precision and accuracy has to be sub-millimeter. It is an extraordinarily hard problem, to the point where, we reported back in 2015 that many at Facebook back then didn't actually believe it was possible. On the release of the original Oculus Quest, the Meta executives reported, or said in some interviews, that they thought that it originally wouldn't actually be possible to pull this off. It's something that's only emerged in the last few years, and yes, you're going to get providers like Qualcomm license out their tech there, but it's one of those things where, until a open source community has been built up and working on this for years, it's just not there yet.
So just to recap this subject before we move on, and I noticed, I think it was Stephanie from Tilt 5 is in our comments. I want to get into Tilt 5 next week. I was very impressed with my demo from Tilt 5. I finally got to see the latest hardware. Jerry Ellsworth, the head of Tilt 5, met with me after one of my days going through everything. And then she pulled a laptop out of her bag. She connected 2 headsets to the laptop, rolled out a mat in front of us for AR content. And it was amazing to have that demo. But I want to get into it more next week, when I can really give it the air to kind of dive into that subject. I just wanted to throw up this image from their Kickstarter video that specifically shows the controllers. I made this tweet sort of, I wasn't going to click the report button on the Kickstarter project, because I'm not a policeman of the internet. I'm a journalist reporting on what's there, but this isn't what I saw, right? This isn't what I saw operationally of their prototype at CES. And that just, like, I don't know. I don't doubt that they're working on it. It makes sense that they would work on it, but like, I saw someone in our comments talking about Chinese New Year coming up, and you've brought up in the past, Heaney, that the factory shut down. I hate seeing people getting frustrated that their things don't come when they expect them to, or when they come, they're not high quality. We cannot recommend anyone back Pimax, and I'll just throw it out there again. I mentioned it before, but they contacted us in the weeks leading up to their Kickstarter, asking if they could use our logo in their Kickstarter project, and I said no. We will test anything they send us, and we will give it a fair shake, but it needs to be finished when we test it.
Yeah, I mean, CES is every January. If you're saying you're going to release a product in January, you need to show the product at CES if you're going to CES. You can't show a different product and say you're somehow going to put it together in the next few weeks. That's just not going to fly. And yeah, I guess you're saying the same thing that a lot of our commenters are saying. It is just astonishing that Pimax will not learn to just stop overpromising. Focus on making one great thing. Be realistic about your promises on your timeline and your specs, and then deliver. Stop the hype, stop the marketing, and stop saying that it's going to ship next month when you haven't actually built the product yet.
Yep. All right, let's move on to the last thing that I can really talk about right now. Like I said, I want to get into Tilt 5 real deep next week, and because I think it's such a fascinating story. Really kind of, like I tried Magic Leap at CS. We'll talk about Magic Leap too, but when I think about the spirit that the Oculus Rift had back when it was on Kickstarter, and the years before it got acquired by Facebook, I think of Tilt 5 matching that spirit for AR, and I want to see where they go with their next steps. So we'll get into that next week. But I did get to visit HTC's area of the Wynn Hotel. They've been at the Wynn for years now, doing their annual announcements for CES, and it's like there's a very specific area of Las Vegas that I've become very familiar with, because it's always like HTC is there first. They do their presentation, They announce their work, and then nobody buys it. Um, I'm being facetious
Wow.
because that wasn't true in 2016 with the initial one, right? And you go back to the first Vive. It was a consumer event. These were consumer games. They were extraordinarily cool. It was all the work that Chet had done at Valve to bring developers, game developers to the table, get them building with a room scale VR headset. And that was a long time ago when Vive was that way. And each subsequent year, HTC has moved further and further away from that original consumer vision until now. And it was weird to come back full circle.
I love that you've forgotten Cosmos, which says a lot about how well Cosmos did, because HTC did try the consumer market again with Cosmos, but obviously it failed.
Oh, you're going to talk about Cosmos? Did you like Cosmos,
Well,
Heaney? What did you think of Cosmos?
I don't think anyone did, but it was their next consumer play. Arguably they could have called that Vive 2 or Vive S. It was HTC's Rift S essentially. If anyone doesn't know what it was their PC VR headset with inside-out tracking, and almost no one bought it.
Is that the one that had two triggers?
Yes, and
let's just throw a second trigger in there and completely change around the input scheme.
Yeah, because why not? I don't understand that. But yeah, I mean, I loved the flip-up design, to be fair. That was a great idea. The problem was, as we were just discussing, they didn't get the inside-out tracking right. They couldn't launch inside-out tracking that matched the Rift S or Windows Mixed Reality or Quest, and that's what caused it to fail. But hopefully this time with XR Elite, they have something that can. And, this is a Quest Pro competitor. Its marketing here, and you'll talk about your experience in a second, is that unlike the Quest Pro, the mixed reality doesn't suck. And if that's true, and it's $400 cheaper, I think it has a place in the market. So can you tell the viewers, did the mixed reality not suck?
Yeah. Well, all right. So I did 4 or 5 demos, or I lost track of all the software. But the first one I went into was Maestro, the conducting experience that's on App Lab. And so it was brought, it's on the XR Elite. HTC was saying that if it works on Vive Focus 3, it should just work on this headset, which is a pretty big deal for transferring people over to the software. All right, so Maestro on this headset, you've got a controller in one hand. I'm given a controller in one hand, and I've just got open air hand tracking in the other. And this experience, I've got sort of an orchestra right in front of me, and I'm supposed to point to parts of the orchestra at the right time that the software is telling me. And I'm supposed to make the right movements at the right time with the chopstick in my hand. It's a controller, but I see a chopstick in VR. So at the outset of this demo, I'm fully immersed in this orchestra experience, ready to experience. And the developer says, can you look over at me? And I turn to my right, and he's standing right there in mixed reality. Now I can't describe how awesome, like I'm going to try my best to describe how awesome of an experience that moment was, and how I kind of had mentally prepared myself for that moment back when I tried the Quest Pro, and it never came, right? All the Quest Pro experiences were by default mixed reality back when they debuted the Quest Pro. And I was super let down by all of the visuals I saw. Like I could see a person there, but I don't really want to look at them because they're that low they're that low resolution. It's like actually distracting to look at them. I just want to look at the virtual content. But here I was looking at really, really great virtual content. And then I turned to my right, and boom, I'm actually looking at really great AR or pass-through content. And I really wanted to connect eye to eye with the developer. There was that much added detail. Now, the thing about it is, I don't know necessarily if it was depth correct or 3D. The scale seemed right. The resolution seemed amazing. But all I can say of that experience was that it was way better than a Quest Pro. Every moment in Quest Pro's mixed reality was less enjoyable than this shocking moment of being in completely virtual content, turning to my right, and boom, oh wow, you're actually here. Like it crossed this line of being so good that like it actually seems feasible to do that sort of handing off of your VR headset to a friend, right? Like for years, it's been miserable to hand off, like for him to explain how to use his app by just turning to him and then turning back to the app was magical. Absolutely fantastic demo. Really, 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 really cool to see that effect. Then, then I started using the software, right? So I'm pointing to things with one hand with my just open air hand tracking, and I'm using a tracked controller with the other. This is something that a Quest cannot do just yet. And after a few minutes, like, it's not recognizing my hand as regularly as I need it to. So like it would lose my hand, then have to reacquire the hand for 2 seconds, and then I could do my pointing. And I'd be mid-point and it might lose the tracking on the hand for this thing. Now it wouldn't lose the controller and I could keep doing the orchestral stuff with this hand, but this hand was just not quite enough. Now, I hate talking about that because that feels like something they could get a lot better. I think Vive probably has the resources to improve exactly that functionality I talked about. Does Pimax have the resources to improve that sort of functionality on any reasonable time frame? I think probably not. So it's really hard to talk about these things.
Just asking, can you just clarify when you were talking about the hand dropping, you're talking about the Vive XR Elite, yes, not the Quest Pro?
Yeah, so I'm on this. Sorry, the whole Maestro demo was done on Vive XR Elite. I'm saying the mixed reality on Vive XR Elite is far superior to anything I saw out of a Quest Pro. But I didn't use it for long enough to like say this is a half hour and it's really comfortable, right? I need that length of time. But I was blown away by how great it was to look to my right and see a person in VR. And in comparing that to the almost identical press event that Meta held a couple months ago to show off the Quest Pro, it was night and day how good that mixed reality was. Now I'm talking about this hand tracking versus controller tracking, and that was also Vive XR Elite, not something you can do quite yet on a Quest Pro, right, Heaney? You can't mix and match hand tracking with controller.
Yeah, that's something that's coming in a future SDK, but is not available. So a few questions I have here for you. Firstly, how was the comfort of this? And I actually forgot to ask, how was the comfort of that Pimax headset? Because you have that unit in the front. Did it feel front heavy? And then obviously, how did this feel on your head?
It felt forgettable in a way that other headsets aren't, right? Like the thing you start noticing more than anything else is the field of view. You start forgetting that something is even there in a really delightful way. With Pimax, it didn't feel overly front heavy, but I also didn't want to be wearing it because the tracking was so bad. So like this one I want to try testing both without the battery pack and with the battery pack. So another demo I did, the next demo, one of the demos I went over to, I tried Yuki in mixed reality, which if you've tried the old lab demo from Valve, they had one of the rooms there for the lab. You had this little spaceship you could operate around the room and dodge waves of enemy attacks and shoot back at them. Yuki was very, very similar, and I was moving around with Yuki, this little character in my hand, shooting at all these waves of things coming at me. It was phenomenal. I spent a good, the largest amount of time of all the Vive XR Elite demos doing this mixed reality demo of shooting all these things. And I enjoyed it. The closest thing that I've enjoyed in mixed reality on Quest Pro was Figment XR. I really, really enjoyed all of that stuff. But Yuki was really, 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 really cool. But something happened in the middle of my demo. The battery died. The battery completely died. The headset just went black. I had no idea what was going on. I'm like, oh, I guess it died. I pull the headset off. The developers go and get another battery pack, pull it off the back of this, stick the new battery pack, and I go back into the Yuki demo where I was fighting the waves of enemies. And I don't think they did it on purpose, but it was a phenomenal demonstration of exactly what sets this device apart and what could like be a really really cool use case. Being able to sort of have it go into standby mode until you get a new battery was really really cool to see.
Yeah, that
Um,
is the
yeah.
most interesting aspect of this device, isn't it? The fact that if anyone's not familiar, that rear battery that on Pico 4 and on Quest Pro is hardwired and you can't attach can just be detached on this. So you can use any USB port as the power source. You could use a battery pack of your own. You could use an airplane's USB port, a train's, a hotel's, and you then no longer have that back padding. So you could lie all the way back on a couch and watch virtual content, which kind of integrates very well with another feature of this device, which is that you can stream certain Android phones screen into VR on a cinema screen. So you could use Disney Plus, you could use a mobile game. There are a lot of interesting things about this device, but I guess the biggest skepticism we have here is obviously that this doesn't have anywhere near the app library that Quest has, and it doesn't even have anywhere near the library that Pico has. As we've just been saying, there are now 3 mobile VR platforms, and in terms of content, you have Quest is way, way, way ahead with like over 1,000 apps, and then now you have Pico trying to catch up, and now you have a third competitor coming into the race. And that's what HTC is going to really, really struggle with, is getting developers to actually invest the time to port over to an $1,100 headset.
So I'll add one of my demos was given to me by Jamie Feltham, our former colleague, who has been in the studio many times recording over the years. Very, very strange. Now, that's why I started off with my sort of jokey uh, summary of HTC moving away from consumer VR over the years. I'm seeing in our comments talking about the Vive Focus 3 having some of these features. And then you pointed out the Cosmos being, officially, HTC never exited the consumer market, right? Like they've been doing this for years, but they've been unable to bring back the audience that they had
Well,
in 2016
they
or
haven't entered
even.
the consumer standalone market. This is their first consumer standalone headset.
Oh yeah, that's right. God, I forgot Cosmos was a PC, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
sorry.
it was a
You broke
PC
up a little
headset.
bit. You broke up a little bit when we were talking about it. Yeah, they've tried so many things over the years. It was interesting to see it all coming together. And the fact that Jamie went over there and I think he was working on getting some of that content onto this system. So there was Hubris on there. It had some really nice environmental effects. Unplugged, I tried it with controllers. I tried it first with hand tracking, but I ended up going to controllers. Unplugged is a very hard experience. Like you're testing the very limits of both like of the hand tracking as well as just interacting with the game. Um, I I loved Unplugged. That was really cool. But again, I tried it uh, with controller tracking. Um, the the reason I brought up Jamie was he and I covered CES together. Him usually away in England, me going to the event. We've only met twice, so that was a coworker I worked with for like half a decade, and we only ever met at CES one year, and then again at CES, and now he's working for one of the companies giving me demos. So it was weird to have someone like uh, who's always going through the demos with me actually giving me a demo. And to stack this year of Vive and HTC against all the previous years, it's it's a changing of the ages, right? Like this is a different era for HTC than we had in the 2010s. And it's interesting and I want it to succeed because we need competing standalone headsets. But the problem with every other iteration before this was even when it had superior like specs, even though it had room scale out of the box back with the original Vive, the hundreds of dollars difference made all the difference for the winning consumer headset. And here, yes, this is doing better than a Quest Pro at a lesser cost, doing a lot of great things, but is it enough of the Quest library to justify an extra $800 or whatever it is, $700?
The other question I'd ask you, and this is something that I saw some commenters asking, is about those lenses. So obviously the Quest Pro, I think we'd all agree, has best in class lenses. Those pancake lenses on Quest Pro are just unmatched. You got a great sweet spot. You've got excellent clarity. It's got wider field of view than a Quest 2. These lenses look to be the same as the Vive Flow from 2021, and I reviewed the Vive Flow, and it was the first headset to launch in the West with pancake lenses, but they are not the same quality of pancake lenses that are in Pico 4 and Quest Pro. I would call the Pico 4 and Quest Pros Gen 2. And so what I'm wondering is, what were these lenses like? What was the field of view? Did it feel as wide as a Quest Pro or an Index? And what about the clarity? Did these feel like it was up to the same par, or did these feel like they compromised to get this form
Yeah.
factor?
It felt crisp. It felt clear compared to Quest Pro. I may have to give an edge. I may still give the edge to Quest Pro on clarity of the lenses and overall just enjoyment of the lenses. But this is a question I think you're going to have to come back to once we get longer amounts of time with the headset. It's a hard question to go into 5 random pieces of software, some of which I've tried before, some of which I haven't. Hey Siri, turn that off. Some of which I've.
There are no timers on HomePod.
That's not true, Siri. All right. It's hard to compare apples to apples, right? In that side of demo, I did fill in your bingo card on that one. I enjoyed the lenses; they were really crisp. The field of view, like the one that bugs me is measuring field of view in a demo like that. Like, I'd have to say it felt smaller, but that's like picking. I'm not going to throw a number at that. Like, I can't. I always thought PlayStation VR had the widest field of view, and I know, like, if you get the fitting just right, it can feel that way. But like, everything has always felt like a step back from that since then. I don't know. I'm having a hard time talking about field of view here. It felt wide, decently wide, but I still would have to say, like, overall, the in-VR visuals were probably superior on Quest, even though the mixed reality was probably better out of Vive XR Elite. But then you start asking about field of view relative to those things, and that's a demo that you have to really take. Take your Quest off, put the XR on, and get a feel for whether you're actually seeing the same height and width out of both of those demos. It's all the same at the end of the day to me on some of these. Yeah.
I'm very much so looking forward to review this. Obviously we hope to have a review for this at launch or soon after launch. We're going to be in contact with HTC soon about figuring out the timeline for that. So that'll be something I'll be digging into. Yeah, if you're at CES and you've tried 10 different headsets in a day, it's hard to kind of note and tell those differences, especially in those incredibly short demos. But yeah, I'll be fascinated to see whether these lenses are just the same flow lenses like they look to be, or if they are a new generation. Because I feel like that could be the weakness in this headset, in that those don't seem to be the same, huge pancake lenses that you see in Pico 4 and Quest Pro.
Yeah, there's still a lot more. This is the one I was writing up right before I came in here, and I'm gonna have to figure out how to express some of these things. But I just the takeaways from what I could get out of those limited demo times was this is the beginning of a new ecosystem for HTC. This is the product that I wanted the Flow to be, and now it's actually shipping. And I think there's going to be an audience for it, and all that content that is coming to this platform. I think we're just beginning to hear that story of what Jamie and others are going to bring to this system is gonna really show us whether it's a a viable alternative to Pico and the others. I what I can say though is the battery removal and the mixed reality both made it interesting enough to be like a viable product we should think about. You could actually put it on your interest list. I'm not going to put Pimax on that same list. I did try the Crystal briefly. I went over and tried it. I tried HTC, or I tried Alex in the Crystal, and it was doing that thing where it was rendering the world at the widest area of the field of view, like a second behind everything else that it was rendering. So like I kept seeing pop in at the edges of my view of the thing, and again, that's a distraction that becomes very hard to assess the overall experience when everywhere you turn, it's rendering the last edges of your field of view after you look at it. Those are things we went through 10 different products, and I'm trying to give this sense that uh, the Panasonic product, was interesting, but it's got to come together as a platform. The Pimax product, I wouldn't put my money into that, but it's still interesting. I want to see what they can do with it. I would love to see what a company that has a lot of software prowess can do with something like the Pimax Portal View system. And then over with HTC, this felt like the rebirth of HTC. This felt like returning to where they were in 2016. And I want Heaney to get extended amounts of time with all of these features, because things like mixing controller input with hand tracking input is a really, really cool idea. They had the Kayak VR on PC with the Kayak being tracked via their bands. The Kayak lost tracking in my demo multiple times. It HTC feels like a company where they've got the resources to improve that software, and I think we're going to see probably a lot of effort there done in the next 6 months. Um, I'm very, very interested to see what HTC does in its very next steps, and that is something that he needs to assess at length for us to get a better opinion out there on.
Yeah, I'm very, very curious to try it. Just to address a few comments here. Micah is saying doubt can do.
Did we just lose Heaney? Did everyone lose Heaney, or did I think yeah. Uh, I don't know what comments he was talking about. And this is happening at the end of our show, so I might have to end it before we can get to those comments. Please bring your comments back. This will be a continuation next week when we get into CS, where I've got Tilt 5, Hollow Ride. I really want to break down what I saw with Hollow Ride. There were haptics. I tried multiple haptic systems. Contact CI had a really interesting haptic system where the glove seemed to wiggle itself onto my fingers. It felt a little bit like the shoe, when you see the shoes in Back to the Future Part 2 and Marty McFly's shoes auto-size themselves. It felt a little bit like that on my hand from Contact CI. And then Kyle and I did a haptics demo at HAPTX, where we actually did multiplayer haptics, each of us with gloves on. That was really interesting. And there are a bunch more demos that I'm still thinking about. We will break those down as I've just really begun to break down everything. Somnium. I'm seeing Somnium right at the end. That demo was at the Vrgineers booth, but it was mounted into a wall. Like they were showing the optics physically in place. You couldn't actually, hold an HMD up to your head or move around in it. They had like a mounted demo. So we'll have to see how far they're able to take that idea of an open source design. I think we'll wrap it up here. Heaney will probably pop in here right as I'm closing out. But I want to say thank you to everyone. I want to say thank you to ValeVR for sponsoring us this week. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe. Consider becoming a member. We've got very, very big plans in 2023, and we are just beginning to cover all of the big announcements that are coming out. We've got every major platform under the sun coming out in various ways, and cannot wait to see. We're just weeks away from Sony's PSVR 2 dropping into the market. Heaney, you have a chance to say goodbye before I have to shut down the stream. Thank you for rejoining. Thank you, everyone, and I'm gonna sign off and I'll let Heaney take it from here.
Yeah, no, I was just going to reply to that. Mike is saying, yeah, Quest Pro does have foveated rendering. Pico 4 Pro, I feel like I've said this on maybe 10 shows now, but Pico 4 Pro is not a consumer product. It is not launching outside China to consumers. It is launching in the West as Pico 4 Enterprise. So unfortunately, it doesn't really matter what it can do because you can't buy it. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Vive XR Elite slots in between those Pico 4 or Pico 4 level products and Quest Pro. And I wonder if my last kind of thought here is I wonder if HTC and Pico could unite on content somehow, because it seems they're facing the same struggle in how do they get enough content to compete with the Quest platform. And it doesn't seem like there's room in the market for 3 platforms, then 4 if you include Pimax, and then 5 when it comes along to Apple. Consumers rarely want to have more than 2 or 3 platforms in a given tech sector.
Yeah, I noticed one of our stories that we had going up today was talking about Team Beef and their VR ports, and I know some of those ports are over on SideQuest, right? And I know SideQuest unofficially supports sort of, they officially support Android-based competing platforms, but if you beefed up what a platform like SideQuest offered and really formally like made that experience of using SideQuest easier on like a Pico and Vive XR Elite, you could really have a differentiating like thing there. If it's easier to use SideQuest and sideload a whole bunch of stuff than it is over on Quest, that would be a really, really interesting thing to kind of push people toward. Yeah, I'd love to see not just Pico and Vive, but Pico, Vive, and SideQuest. I think there's an opportunity for those companies to team up and offer something really great for people.
Yeah, and it just comes back to also that idea that Daydream could have been this layer that we're looking for, this kind of Google Play Store for VR. You could have literally had a Google Play Store for VR, and every non-Meta Android headset, you could buy content and it would all run together. But HTC pulled out of Daydream, which people never really talk about being a big part of Daydream's demise. HTC's focus was actually supposed to be a Daydream headset, but they pulled out. They wanted their own platform. It just seems weird that HTC is now trying to make a hardware profit and be the software provider, but I understand why all these companies gun for that, but it's not going to last. In the long term, they're going to need to be fewer software platforms, and some of these hardware makers are going to just have to start adopting one of their competitors' platforms eventually. Why not now?
Yeah. A great note to end off on. Yeah, we will get to it next week. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you in the future.